Well, and I see we are already a lot, many of us, and that makes me happy. And we'll have different moments to welcome you also in the chat as you join. So maybe I'll start with a very brief note to welcome you on behalf of UNITAR and our collaborative partner, Diplomats Without Borders, to this webinar, which is part of a webinar series we are organizing with Diplomats Without Borders. Anna will share more information. My colleague Anna, that is under UNITAR Division for Peace Access, will share more information about the series in the chat. So you'll have, if you're interested, you can certainly look into that. And I'll start to say that while this is part of the series of the events organized with Diplomats Without Borders, it's also an opportunity for us to include it as part of our induction week for our students of the master program in humanitarian action and peacebuilding that we co-design and co-implement with our collaborative partner, Oxford Brookes University. So this is a very warm welcome to all of you. We wanted to give you a taste of the type of initiatives you'll have access to being part of this master program on the side of UNITAR. Welcome to everyone, and a special shout out to the students starting the program next week. That said, it's all on my end, and it's my pleasure to hand over to my colleague from UNITAR, to our dear moderator for today, Mr. Khalid Singh. Khalid, over to you. Welcome again, everyone.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And welcome to this new webinar organized by the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. As Alex said, as an introduction to participants in the Humanitarian Action and Peacebuilding Master's Degree Program. My name is Khalid Zine, and I am a senior program specialist from the Division of Peace of UNITAR, based here in New York. Just a reminder, we have participants from the diplomatic community. We have staff from UN missions, other agencies, funds, and programs. A warm welcome to all of you. The topic of today's webinar is on leading through complexity, leadership, team, and self-management for UN 2030 Agenda implementation in conflict settings. As you can see on the slide, what we will try to do in the next 60 minutes is to examine with our distinguished experts panel some of the essential skills necessary for professionals. And we are looking here at, we are looking more at the mid to senior future leaders working in fast changing environments, very complex environment. In particular, we will try to focus on leadership skills, team management skills, and skills to perform effectively and efficiently as part of a team or an organization. It will include a component on stress management and introduces a number of techniques that can be applied for self-support, but also to support peers and members of communities in conflict-affected countries. I am honored today to moderate this discussion on the topic, along with two remarkable accomplished individuals, Ambassador Maged Abdelaziz, Ambassador and Permanent Observer of the League of Arab States to the United Nations, and member of Diplomats Without Borders, and Mr. Patrick McNamara, Independent Consultant, supporting leaders in systems change for sustainability. Behind the scene, we have my two colleagues, Ana Morera and Ilona Morenzi, for logistic support. Please allow me first to introduce the panels, and I will hand over to Ambassador Maged Abdelaziz for his introduction. Ambassador, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, dear Khalid, and thank you for UNITAR and Diplomats Without Borders for organizing this important seminar, and the focus on leadership, team, and self-management for the UN 2030 agenda is a very timely focus at this time. My name is Maged Abdelaziz. I'm a veteran Egyptian diplomat, 70 years old, spent about 34 years of them working with the United Nations in New York in different capacities, as a diplomat, as a deputy ambassador, as ambassador, and then as Under-Secretary General for African Affairs, and then now as ambassador of the League of Arab States a regional organization, to the United Nations. And as a leading member also of the Diplomats Without Border, a newly established organization that has about 100 of the retired diplomats that are working mostly on multilateral affairs and trying to sustain peace around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And it is exactly for this long experience, seasoned experience, that and strong analytical, strategic oversight and excellent leadership and managerial experience that we invited you today to share some of your insights into this thematic area. So we are very fortunate to have you today. Thank you so much. We are also fortunate to have Mr. Patrick McNamara. As I said before, he is a consultant to UN agencies for 15 years. So, Mr. Patrick, please, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks very much. Yes, yeah, I've been consulting with UN agencies for quite some time. I started in leadership development with the UNDP Learning Resources Center in New York, and then did a series of leadership development programs for resident representatives, as well as for mid-level staff across the system. And then in 2015 or so, I moved into leadership, into innovation for crisis in the hub in Amman, Jordan, representing UNDP and UNHCR in the regional joint secretariat there. And we worked across 6 countries, the 5 countries surrounding Syria, on the refugee crisis, and built a learning community for innovation and to help NGOs and UN agencies adapt to the complex situation, build resilience. And then most recently, I've been focusing on collaboration and innovation across agencies and within agencies. I'm working now on an SDG accelerator with UNDP SDG integration. We have 40 participants from across 16 agencies, and we've been going for about 7 months, working on UN 2.0, the emerging culture, the new culture of the UN that comes from the Secretary General's office. So I've had 3 phases of my career and very broad experience with a lot of different agencies, and I'm just thrilled to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for all of you for joining, and I look forward to the dialogue.
No, very impressive. Thank you so much, Mr. Patrick, and looking forward to the discussion. It sounds very interesting. Thank you so much. Before we start, just a small note to our dear participants. If you have a question, please drop it to the chat box, and we will be glad to convey them to our honorable speakers at the end of the discussion as we move forward. So a lot to talk about today. So let's get started. And I will start with Ambassador Magid with my first question, and it's tied to your extensive leadership experience in global multilateral diplomatic affairs. Can you please share some examples where adaptive leadership played a crucial role in managing complex and fast-changing environments? And how can future leaders, looking at our participants here, can balance immediate urgent humanitarian needs with long-term strategic goals, like looking at the 2030 SDGs implementation, for example? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think that we are meeting now at a very auspicious moment, that we are at the doorsteps of the Summit of the Future and of the meetings that are going to start next week here in New York in this particular manner. But looking to the past to take lessons for the future is very important, as you just hinted. I think the most striking example that I would like to cast here is the Arab Spring. And I come from Egypt myself, and where the revolution started in Tunisia and spread all over in Egypt, in Libya, in other parts, in Syria, in many other parts of the Arab world. And those who did the revolutions were the young generations, the youth, who were protesting the lack of economic developments, the violations of human rights, the looking for a better future. and better action. The problem that youth had at that time was that they were not prepared to lead to the future. That is why the revolution in many parts of the Arab world have been stolen from them. And the Islamist groups and the other beneficiaries who wanted to benefit from this revolution to build new centers of powers emerged into the surface. And that resulted in many contradictions and many disputes that have spread around in the Arab world. So the most important thing, our lesson to be learned from this is for the young generation to be always prepared. If you take action, you should be always prepared to lead after that action. And you should have the strategic framework that is necessary for such kind of leadership. And you should have your plan ready for assuming the proper leadership with the specific targets, indicators, and benchmarks that should achieve your objective and achieve your proper, you are properly going to reach the target that you are trying to achieve. Fortunately, many of the Arab countries are now moving forward with the help and the support of the young generation. We in Egypt, for instance, we have 60% of the population, young population, and all the Arab countries are running on a massive scale economic development and on the full implementation of their national plans of the 2030 agenda of the United Nations. And you must have seen in the last HLPF how many Arab countries, up till now we have 22 countries in the League of Arab States, up till now 17 of them have presented their national reports about the implementation of the 2030 agenda in all aspects, in political, in economic, in social, in women, in youth, in all aspects of the Arab world. So this striking example, maybe it is not a pleasant example to say because it led into some deterioration in the standards of living, or some deterioration in currencies in certain countries, or some different levels of development that were not expected. But it is a striking example of how the youth or the young generation should be prepared to lead and should be prepared with plans and with action.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ambassador. And I think, to my mind, I think it's the right example because of the complexity of the situation. We've been following throughout the evolving crisis, and we saw how the challenges of the moment, especially for the, as you said, the stolen revolution from the youth and the strategic objectives that has been defined for them. Thank you so much. It was a very striking example. Mr. Patrick, building on what the ambassador just said, you've been working extensively on building resilience among, I think this time, among UN workers in conflict zones. Could you please shed some light on some of the key challenges for leaders in navigating complex international conflicts today?
Great. Yes, thank you, Khaled. Yes, I worked, I would say, more in complex situations where there was a lot of change. You know, the Syrian refugee crisis, which followed the Arab Spring, and there, stakeholder engagement, engaging all parties to come up with solutions, to build solutions that cross the NGO, government, business, and UN agencies, the collaboration among those agencies. And I know collaboration in a conflict situation sounds almost impossible. My expertise is more in crisis than conflict, but nonetheless, it can be done. There is through skillful stakeholder engagement. And my specialty is more in the mid-level, with the technical expertise, people coming in, working on the ground in conflict. In Sudan, for example, there is a project between UNDP and UNHCR to look at governance in villages, in a country where the governance, the central government has really is not present in those areas, and there's a lot of chaos because of that. So in these programs, they're building circles of local governance, and both from the humanitarian side and the development side, building connections amongst stakeholders in all areas of the community. So that's one example in a conflict and in a complex situation, how creating safe spaces for communication and building trust amongst stakeholders can create more stability, and a place where the community can recover from the conflict and then begin to transform their situation. I have many other examples, but that is one. And I also say that I was attracted to go to the Middle East after Arab Spring because I wanted to make a contribution. And I first went to Egypt, actually, to Iskandariya, to learn Arabic, which was a big project. And I was there for 6 months and then was called to Jordan. And there I was there for 4 years working on the refugee crisis. So in the first year and a half, it was a lot of chaos, a lot of people in crisis, individuals in crisis, and leaders in crisis, because things were changing so quickly. We didn't know what was coming next. From week to week or month to month, there were changes, a lot of resistance from local governments for the refugees to be engaged. And so the traditional ways of leading just did not work. Refugees were not going to the camps in an orderly way. There were 65% of the refugees were in urban areas, and the old systems didn't work. So the group that I was with, we created the Regional Refugee Resilience Plan. We, with a larger team, raised $6 billion with 250 representatives from member states. And over a 4-year period, we started with this coping phase to build resilience, which lasted about a year and a half, and at the same time develop partnerships with multiple stakeholders and ways to reduce the chaos and to manage the $6 million and how that could be spent to achieve results. And then we moved slowly to a recovery phase. And I'm talking about it as if it was planned out. It's not planned out. It's happening as you're building the infrastructure to handle the crisis. And but the NGOs, the UN agencies, and the government actors all helped to create conditions for recovering from the crisis, to build housing, to build infrastructure for education, to build a sustainable supply of food. And so that recovery period lasted maybe 2 years. And then we moved into a transformation phase where we start working with governments, working with unions, working with businesses to find ways to help refugees legally have employment. All the first phase, they were not working. They were not allowed to work. So those 3 phases of building resilience are coping, recovering, and transforming. And over that 4-year period, myself and we had people in all the country offices. I mean, there were hundreds of people working on this. And so we intentionally brought in experts on resilience and went through those phases in an organized way as we could, given the uncertainties and rapidly changing environment.
Thank you so much for those examples. Very interesting examples indeed. Just looking back into that same period, and I can't imagine, to be honest, the stress that you and the hundred of colleagues that was involved in those projects to manage and to have this stakeholders collaboration among partners, developing resilience plans, etc. I don't want to jump to solutions here, but what are some of the most effective self-management or self-management and coping mechanisms, techniques that you recommend from that specific examples that you nicely highlighted for UN personnel working in high pressure environment?
So I can start. So one thing that we did is we created a support system for the colleagues. It was called a learning community, but it was really a community of colleagues who supported each other. And within each of the thematic areas, we had weekly meetings in each country. So people got to know each other. The people got not just to work on the substantive issues, but also to talk about what was going on for them, to get that individual support. So that was one thing that we did. Another is a resilience building tool from the wellness area. It's now at World Food Program. It is now holding that piece, but it was a tool that helped people reach back into positive, to get themselves into a positive zone. Because you're in these crisis situations, there's a lot of negative energy, a lot of anger, a lot of tension. And so it's really important to be able to center oneself and to be able to just walk calmly in the face of all of this tension. And it's nice to talk about it, but when you're really in it and it's happening on multiple times in a day, it's a lot of breathing. I took up meditation, which really helped my personal centering. And that building of self-awareness actually also helps us see the whole system, helps us have better relationships with our colleagues and with other stakeholders, and to be in a neutral place to hold space for convening sessions that could lead to innovation. But it all comes from that personal centeredness, and there's so many different ways to achieve that, that you have to find what works for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Ambassador Magid, following the same lines, but from a more soft skill related to leadership, from your perspective, what are some of the key cultural and organizational challenges that you have encountered while working with regional organizations? And how do you navigate leadership differences and build trust among leaders to ensure and secure effective peace building and development efforts?
Well, as an African and an Arab at the same time, I will try to draw some sort of comparison between the African Union and the League of Arab States in this regard. Okay. And to draw this comparison, I have to draw it on different angles, from different angles. First is the angle of how committed you are to sovereignty, to individual sovereignty of state vis-a-vis collective interests of the group. The African Union in 2015 adopted Agenda 2063. And I was there in the United Nations under Secretary General for Africa, and I participated in some of the negotiations of the African Union and helped the African Union negotiate out this agreement. And that marked the turn from African Union, from the non-interference in internal affairs of African Union to non-indifference, meaning that the interest of the group supersedes the interest of the individual country. And that is what African Union has taken as a basis for the establishment of a Peace and Security Council, for the establishment of the mechanism to evaluate good governance, for the establishment of human rights mechanisms, of the establishment for many of the mechanisms within the African Union, with some measures that are enforcing what is being agreed upon those mechanisms. And with African participation with the United Nations is peacekeeping missions and is peacemaking missions on the ground. On the other side, on the Arab side, we are still in the League of Arab States committed to the principle of sovereignty. Each individual member state has a veto on everything and on anything. And if a member state does object to a resolution that is adopted, even at the level of the ministers or at the level of the summit, it is allowed not to implement it even in a multilateral forum like the United Nations. And that is a big difference. We haven't yet reached this kind of reform that would allow us to establish a Peace and Security Council, for instance, in the League of Arab States, and that would allow us to establish a department for peacekeeping operation and to dispatch peacekeepers to take part with the United Nations on the ground in countries that are in trouble in the Arab world. So the concept of sovereignty is one problem. The other one is the level of development. In Africa, mostly all countries are even for those of them that are rich and those who are not rich, they have more or less the same level of development. In the Arab world, you know, I mean, there are some that are super rich and there are some that are below the poverty line. And this kind of indifferences or imbalances within the economic development particularly is creating some sort of imbalance also in the implementation of the Agenda 2030. And how do we measure in the Arab League the implementation, and how do we put forward the plans in order to help countries to try to do that? Also, the role of the sub-regional organizations is very important. In Africa, there are very strong sub-regional organizations: ECOWAS, SADC, East African Community. The Maghreb Union is idle for the time being because of one of the repercussions of the Arab Spring, and before that, because of some differences among neighbors in North Africa. But in Africa, the strong sub-regional organizations are leading under the auspices of the African Union. I don't say that they are in harmony 100%, but they have a good husband and wife relation. So they are not, they don't fight and they don't allow things to deteriorate, but at the same time they coexist and they achieve the same objective. That is important. We in the Arab world, we don't yet have sub-regional organizations, even though we have the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, comprising of the Gulf countries that are dealing with that. If you speak about the peace building and development framework, I think the striking example that I want to draw here is, and that is my last remark, is the framework agreements that the United Nations, the African Union, the World Bank did together in the Great Lakes, in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, in the period between 2013 and 2015. And that resulted in these framework agreements were brokered by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and I was working with him at that time on this endeavor. And we managed to dedicate a huge amounts of money from the World Bank to help link peace and security with economic and political development with respect to human rights and fundamental freedoms through generation of economic activities that are going to allow those terrorist organizations to disappear, whether it is Boko Haram in Nigeria, whether it is Al-Shabaab in the Horn of Africa, or whether it is the M23 in Congo or in other places. So this is what the United Nations is all about. Is about the linkage between the three pillars of the work of the organization with the help and the support of the regional organizations in order to achieve our objectives.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ambassador. And it's honestly very amazing, the example you cited earlier, and to see how those intricacies, especially related to cultural, organizational, regional, impact the vision, the strategies, and the achievement of the strategic objectives of regional. And those example you cited on the REX is very enlightening. Moving forward, Mr. Patrick, based on your work with the UNHCR and UNDP that you highlighted earlier in conflict settings like Sudan or Libya, how have you ensured that the design of those programs is sensitive and taking care of the local context, communities, and adhere to the do no harm principle while still balancing the immediate needs with the sustainable development goals? Over to you.
So I can bring one example. It's actually one that I didn't work on myself, but it's a Sustainable Development Goals assessment tool used in Colombia with a lot of displaced persons from the conflict in Venezuela. And there was a lot of listening, a lot of interviewing of vulnerable people in challenging zones of the country, using a tool that would help create trust with those individuals in a series of interviews, and slowly building trust then within communities across sectors, with business leading that. So there was a lot of listening, a lot of actually co-designing, and then working between UNDP and UNHCR to ensure the do not harm principle was securely in place, and also to ensure the needs and the unspoken needs that we were able to draw out in those interviews were also met. But one of the biggest challenges of that project in the very beginning was to develop the good communication between the two UN agencies and across the country team, and very strong leadership and a lot of willingness to collaborate was very helpful in allowing for the on-the-ground work to happen, that where the trust from the country team was sort of spread out and allowed the technical people to be empowered to do their work and to feed that back in. And you might think that that's just a given, but it really, the context of trust from the country team was one of the key things that helped ensure that situation met the needs of the beneficiaries.
And just out of curiosity, did you manage to see the results of all these efforts on the ground?
Yes, we did a meeting, was it last December, with across that project? There were 5 different projects, Afghanistan, Sudan, etc., at a high-level meeting at the end of the year to review the results. So yes, we did see them at Afghanistan, for example. They used the area-based approach, so it was adapted to the country and adapted to the situation in each conflict zone. And I already mentioned the Sudan example. So yes, and I can give Alex the link to the study that was done looking across those cases.
Thank you so much. It will be very interesting and curious to see the results, to be honest. I think we are moving quite nicely. Before moving to the questions from participants, one last question for each. Ambassador Magid, you work closely with heads of states and senior government officials in support of Africa's implementation of significant global and regional frameworks, as you just mentioned earlier. As we are looking at the Summit of the Future, currently unfolding on the margin of the UN General Assembly, to be honest, I can't shy from raising my expectations to see the final results and the achievements of this almost full year discussion. My question, though, is what type of strategic leadership tenets or principles that are needed to make such big events like this one a success?
It requires first that you realize what is wrong and how to fix it.
Yeah.
So what is wrong is that the multilateral system in the United Nations is broken. And that geopolitical struggle between the East and West on one side on peace and security, and between the North and the global South on economic and social development is hampering the achievement of our common objectives as agreed in the United Nations. It is also hampering the achievement of the 2030 agenda. Only 15% of the 2030 agenda have been implemented up till the mid-term point last year. And we had the summit here in New York, and that concluded that only 15 to 18% have been implemented. And we have the other half, and we don't know where are we heading with that. For problems on FFD, financing for development, for problems on climate, for problems on terrorism, for problems on nuclear weapons, for problems on, and what is on the political side, the geopolitical struggle between the East and the West, which is leading to the current stalemate situations with regard to Gaza, with regard to Sudan, with regard to Ukraine, and with regard to many other conflicts that the Security Council is paralyzed in dealing with. So everybody is looking to the summit of the future and to the document that we are still negotiating actually up till now. Up till yesterday, there was a silent procedure that was broken over 8 paragraphs. We are still negotiating them today and tomorrow, hoping that we will try to broker the agreement and deliver it to the heads of state on Sunday. So we will deliver among this, and this is very much related to our meeting today, is that we have another document called the Pact for the Future Generation.
Yeah.
That is Pact for the Future Generation is deciding very bold steps how to allow the future generation to lead, or at least to take part of half plus of the responsibility of leadership, so that we have a smooth moving of the interests in the multilateral sphere. We have also another document on the Global Digital Compact, how to utilize the latest technologies and AI and others in order to achieve our objectives and to correct the path of the multilateral system in all counts. We have many other ministerial meetings, whether it is on climate, on the sea level rise, on nuclear, on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We have the meetings on the two-state solution on Palestine. We have the 3 meetings on Sudan. We have meetings on Libya, Syria, Yemen, you name it. I mean, we have hundreds of meetings, plus few hundreds of side events with think tanks, institutions, with UNITAR, with Diplomats Without Borders, with everybody that is participating. But it is about if there is a political will to fix the system and to fix the multilateral system, then the United Nations is going to remain the focus. If there is no political will, then the fate of the League of Nations awaits the United Nations. I'm sorry to be casting this kind of pessimistic glimpse, but it is there. And we have also to fix the institutions. Security Council reform is inevitable. It can't be that Africa is not represented in the permanent seats. It is not fair that the Arab world is not represented in the permanent seats. And it is not fair to say that there are going to be permanent members, but without veto rights, and that the veto will continue to be with the 5 old members. That is not fair. And also, it is not fair to keep the financial institutions as they are, with their decision-making mechanisms, which has to change to be in the benefit of the developing world. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for an insightful analysis. And I think going back to your starting point for this answer is, I think all these meetings that you highlighted recognize the fact that there is a problem. So we are starting from a good footing, just realizing that there is a problem that led to these hundreds of meetings and few hundreds of site events, etc. So thank you so much for your insight. My final question for Mr. Patrick is on leadership capacity development in crisis and high tension environment. And best example, Syria refugee crisis or Afghanistan. How did you help the UN, the NGOs, and other government institutions build resilience and shift mindset and engage differently to transform the way they lead?
So I'll give an example in Afghanistan. This is in the previous regime. I was part of a group that did a one-week leadership program for women in government positions within the Afghan government at the time. And really what we did was create a safe space for the women to connect with each other and to share what was happening with them, to share their aspirations, to share their goals, but to really be able to share their biggest challenges. And from that place, we did some visioning around what they wanted to see for women and girls in the country, and used a process called four-dimensional mapping, an interactive participatory process to really to enact their vision. And from that process, very creative participatory process, came a lot of inspiration and some ideas for programs. And when I look at the surge in the last 2 months of things happening for women on the ground in smaller places in Afghanistan, I can only think that some of the women who were involved in that program are still doing things in small ways in their area. So that's one example. Another example is the SDG Leadership Lab, which 25% of the country teams have gone through. And it's a similar process. It's creating space for leaders to be authentic with each other. And in the past, we could do command and control. We could map things out. Each agency could fight for itself and their own funding, but that doesn't work anymore. The UN, in order to be effective and to be relevant, we need to collaborate with each other. We started that with one UN back in 2001 or something like that in words, but this leadership, SDG Leadership Labs, has really created collaboration and innovative programs in both humanitarian countries and development countries. So it's that those relationships between the agencies or between the actors and the ability to listen and to be open to new ideas and to have enough self-awareness to see the whole picture, see the whole system. And all of those aspects of the systems thinking and the relational awareness are all part of what can lead to collaboration and innovation during a crisis, or in a country that is in crisis, I should say.
Thank you so much. Very insightful examples indeed. I think we move to, we have 10, 12 minutes for our participants. And I will start with a very interesting question from Rabi Al-Rahbi. And I think it's more geared towards what the ambassador was highlighting earlier in his last comment on what are the best mechanisms resulting in effective implementation process of global resolutions. So basically, what are the best mechanisms that we can develop to effectively implement some of the global resolutions? And we are looking here at the Agenda 2030, African Union Agenda 2063, etc.
Well, I mean, you can't only look at the Agenda 2063 and the Agenda 2030, but you have also to look on implementation of resolutions regarding Gaza. the ceasefire resolutions, a Security Council resolution that is saying ceasefire, and there is no implementation. There has to be, this is one of the topics that is being discussed, and it's going to be dealt with in the document, the Pact for the Future. And actually, it's one of the paragraphs that are still under consideration now. And how to make the United Nations more viable and more, I don't want to say forceful, but more effective in implementation of its own resolutions and its own decisions, particularly if a resolution, for instance, is adopted in the General Assembly by a vast majority of member states, 170, 180, 190 votes, and it doesn't get implemented. What mechanisms can we do in order to do that? I don't think that the issue of sanctions or issue of enforcement is being considered as an alternative as a first step, because there has to be some other ways or to sensitize states in order and parties of each of those problems or issues to implement their commitments. But it is variant from each one of them rather than the other. So there is recognition that implementation mechanisms are needed, and that we cannot just be passing resolutions without getting them implemented on the ground, while humanitarian suffering is increasing. More than 40,000 Palestinians perished, more than 100,000 injured, and the Gaza has been flattened. And who's going to build this? Where are the reparations? Where are the compensations? Then the role of the ICJ is also very important. When ICJ adopt resolutions or adopt temporary measures, this has to be implemented. And that's why today we are voting in the General Assembly and on the implementation resolution of the last ICJ advisory opinion about the Israeli practices in the occupied Palestinian territories. And you have to wait for the vote to take place after 12 midday today.
Okay, looking forward to it, sir. Very interesting. The next question from our audience is, I think this one is more, and we touched on this, I think earlier in the context of Colombia. Mr. Patrick, how do you assess the efforts done by different international agencies, UNDP, for example, UNHCR you worked with, and what are the challenges in doing those assessments?
So in doing assessments, I think looking at the good and innovative practices and the aspects that are needed on the ground, the aspects that the donors are needing, the aspects that are the objectives or the outcomes, desired outcomes from the collaboration or from the initiatives, creating a framework to assess the good and innovative practices, looking for what is working rather than criticizing and finding out what isn't working and focusing on what's not working. That's the approach that we used in the region during the Syria crisis, and it helped build more positive success because people were focusing on what was needed by the beneficiaries and the donors and what was working. And in a crisis situation, in a complex situation, if you learn what's working, you can test and learn to expand what's working. So we really use that test and learn approach as well. So it's not as much evaluation in the old way that we used to. Well, it's still be done, but it's a new way of really engaging with the system and allowing the system to help define the methods that are working the best in the crisis.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Very helpful. I think we have room for one last question, and it's from Iskandar. And I think it's for both panelists. it goes back to this cultural and organizational dimensions in leadership skills. And what are the rule? The question is, what are the rule done, or does the cultural sensitivity play in leadership and teamwork in diverse UN missions, political missions, peacekeeping missions, special envoys, etc.? So over to you.
Okay, you want me to start?
Please, Ambassador.
Okay. I think, I mean, diversity is one of the basic principles of the United Nations, like gender equality. Yes. Diversity and gender equality are both equally authentic in the United Nations. So, and in the United Nations, there are many that have dual and sometimes triple nationalities that are working together very successfully in very complex peacekeeping and peacemaking missions around the globe. I think the most important thing is to build trust and confidence among the members of the team. As a leader, I'm talking here as a leader of this kind of group, to have better communication and better understanding, to everybody knows everything, to have to act as a role model for them, and to treat everybody regardless of their cultural or diverse origin equally. Complementarity of work between them, to make sure that each one has a better understanding and complement what others are doing in the same mission, and also ensuring the gender equality and the participation of young generation, and taking their opinion and their actions into account while planning and strategizing, and while implementing on the ground those important missions.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Very, very clear, very insightful. Thank you so much. I hope that with this high notes, we are closing this webinar, with a very, very nice high note. Thank you so much. Before we close, as you can see on the slide, these are the upcoming webinars that we have on this series. The next would be in October on gender responsive protection of civilians, from legal frameworks to community-based strategies, and another one in November on humanitarian law in action, and a last one in December for this year on climate change as a threat to global security. So before I close, in 1 minute each, panelist, Ambassador, any final thoughts?
My final thought is that we are dependent, as a 70-year-old man, to say that we are dependent on the new generation to take the lead, whether it is in the United Nations or outside the United Nations.
Yes.
I have a 32-year-old lady in my house, my daughter, and I'm dependent on her, and not only on the family affairs, but also I'm dependent on how does she think, and how does she act, and developing does she develop the sense of responsibility, and the sense of the community, and the sense of the social and the economic and cultural diversity, and acting together with her friends, with her society, in order to lead for a better future.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Very touching. Professor Patrick, over to you.
Yes, I would say, well, I'm first responding to the earlier question. It's, leadership and management is relational. And even in a crisis situation, having that relationship, having the trust that you mentioned, and being able to see the whole system and all of the stakeholders and engage in a way that is two-way, and engage in a way that allows for innovation. I think that is what is needed to move forward, and to be in a high-performing team where you're aligned, where you know what needs to be done, and people are taking responsibility to move forward on a common agenda.
Thank you so much, Professor. I can't thank you enough, both Patrick and Ambassador Majid, for your very insightful thoughts and provocative discussion. Grateful that with such high notes we bring this webinar to an end. Ladies and gentlemen, a most sincere thanks to our honorable guests, the Ambassador Majid Abdelaziz and Professor Patrick McNamara for joining us, for their deep and provocative thoughts. And we certainly look forward to welcoming you and engaging with you in a future webinar, or hopefully in a live upcoming event. If you have any further questions, please forward them to us, and the team will be more than happy to follow up. Thanks to UNITAR, thanks to Diplomats Without Borders, to our panelists, to our participants, and last but not least to my colleagues Anna and Alexandra for coordinating the events. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.